Hi, everybody. Brandi here. I am working through the idea of depth and complexity with a group of teachers as we read through this book, Differentiating for Learners. And it is a revised and updated edition, Going Beyond the Basics, by Diane Hecox and Richard Cash. And we came to this idea around depth and complexity, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and it really triggered something within me. I am a bit of a geek, but I also have a bit of a wild side. And so putting those things together, I love riding dirt bikes, and people usually don't even put the two things together. One of my students said, Dr. B, I thought you were just some run-of-the-mill housewife, stay-at-home mom, and then all of a sudden I realized you are a biker babe. And yes, I am a biker babe. I love to ride dirt bikes in the Pacific Northwest mountains with my family. It's something that we've been doing. Gosh, I've been doing it with my husband since 1998, and for my first Mother's Day got my own dirt bike, and now it's become something I love to do. The geeky part is the fact that I'm not really tuned in when I'm riding my dirt bike. I'm more tuned into what I'm learning and listening to on my podcasts. So I've got my podcast or my audiobooks going in the background, and it is like the best relaxation ever because I'm learning all of these new things, plus I'm seeing all of this gorgeous countryside and moving from point A to point B. And it's interesting because as I'm listening to these podcasts, generally they're about education, gifted ed sometimes, or leadership. It sparks ideas in me. I'm constantly making those connections, and it made me think about a connection I had to depth and complexity. So one of the things within depth and complexity that they're talking about is taking learning to the next level. So we look at those standards for kids, and what we want to do is we want to add an increased level of depth and rigor, so deeper learning, or an increased level of complexity. And I think about that in terms of the hobbies that we have. So one of the hobbies I have obviously is riding dirt bikes, and dirt bikers have their own specialized vocabulary. Monkey butt is one of those words that I was like, what in the world? Until I took a 6-hour ride, I had no idea what monkey butt was, what it felt like, or the fact that I never wanted to experience a numb bum again. Or they use the word brap. I'm like, what's brap? And my husband said, do you know it's the sound that the motorcycle makes when it goes brap, 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 up to the next level. My husband would say things like to me when I was learning, like, follow your lines. I'm like, follow my lines or find your lines. What is he talking about? And as I was driving behind him, we have this specialized vocabulary again that I'm mentioning, and he's saying, watch my lines. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm watching. He said, when I say watch my lines, I mean, watch where I'm going. And as somebody who was learning, what I would do then is I would follow his lines. And so as I got better and began to have more understanding, more depth and more complexity, and became a better writer, I could make my own lines and create my own lines. But when I started, I had to follow his, because when you're going up a hairy piece and you're about to hit what they call a rodeo, where you've got to go slow to get up and over because you're bouncing over these rocks and these roots, and it goes against everything that you can even imagine when they say, give it gas, it'll help you get over. And you think, I don't want to go faster, I want to go slower. But you're going to fall if you go slower. You've got to go ahead and, really give it that gas and crank on it. So we have that specialized vocabulary that we all talk into. And then we also have a different way that we do things. And it might be, for instance, inside of the dirt bike circle, is that when my husband and I ride with our friends, my husband's generally in the front, is the strongest rider. The other strongest rider is his best friend that's in the back. And then the amateurs are in the middle. And I'm usually one of those members that's an amateur, and I'm usually almost last, just so the other group can go up ahead a little bit farther, and then that person can kind of guide me up the mountain. And so that's one thing that we do. There's obstacles, there's weather that comes in, there's unfamiliar territory or unfamiliar terrain. There's all those different variables that give it an added level of depth or an added level of complexity. We also have to form hypotheses along the way, and we need to make our best guesses. So there's this course that we ride called Baby Bold, and it is probably about 35 35, 40 minutes north of our house near the Canadian border. And really what we have to do is we have to form a hypothesis. So 309 is one of the scariest routes that we have to go up, and it's one of those rodeo routes that I was talking to you about earlier. And you're either going to lose it because you're going to be pushed beyond all fathomable, reason that you're not going to do this, or you're going to nail it and you're going to do great and you're going to get up to the top. But when you get to the top, I can guarantee you're going to be soiled, which means dirty from head to toe. Again, more of that language. So we're going to have to form a hypothesis and decide what lines we need to take in order to get up to the top. What are those factors that are involved? What are the reoccurring events that we have to do? We know on this that there's switchbacks. And so we're going to take the switchbacks probably very similar each time, unless there's a variable or a factor that's in there which might be a fallen tree from the storm the night before. We have to examine what might be different, and then we have to determine the effects or consequences of those differences. And those are all of the different ways that we look at that depth and complexity just in the area, this one area of riding dirt bikes. But think about an area that you might be passionate about. So Tony Hawk, skateboarding, passionate about skateboarding. And he has his own language. His people have his own language. His followers, I'm sure they're called Hockeys, have their own language that they all speak. They do things a little bit different. They see the world from that perspective. And you can bring a beginner in with me, and then you can add those levels of depth and complexity. If you're a camper, you can add those levels of depth and complexity from, starting out maybe camping in an RV to maybe hammock camping, maybe to going out survival camping where you've got everything that you need on your back and you're off and away. So there's all sorts of different things that you can look at. Boating, cooking, there's DIYers out there. There's people that are constantly doing different types of hobbies. And think about your hobby right now. What's the language that you use? Is there a specialized language in that hobby? What are the variables and factors that make that a little bit more complex, that add a rich and a deeper depth to what it is that you're doing, that make you more of an expert than probably I am? How do you form those hypotheses? How do you look at those problems of, something new that you're cooking for the first time? What are the variables? What are some different things that might happen along the way? My husband was mentioning to me yesterday that cooking was very analytical and methodical and didn't lead itself to a lot of creativity if you followed the recipe. So maybe that wasn't the best example. Perhaps DIY might be a better example, but I'll leave that up to you. Now think about the subject areas that you teach and how you might add depth and complexity in the classroom. So again, we're looking at, let's say, math, for instance. There is that specialized vocabulary that students need to know. And we can add in and bring in that specialized vocabulary as we take them up the ladder, or that depth that they might need in order to go deeper into a specific subject area. We can add in those variables. We can change the different obstacles that they might have along the way. There's so many different things that we can do in math, language arts, history, science. And how do we do it? One thing that I like to do is quite simply, you can go and buy these whiteboard dice. I like to get 1 or 2 of them at the dollar store. You can write on here some of the different things that they might run into that could increase depth and complexity. And if you're reading the book here like I am from Hecox and Cash, some of those include, like we talked about, the specialized vocabulary. It includes, let me get there very quickly. Here's that list. The specialized vocabulary, determining the attributes, the factors or variables that they might come into, the defending through evidence, making predictions, generating courses of action, examining unanswered questions. All of those things you can put on here. Some areas around depth, and then some areas around complexity might be examining past, present, and future events, examining change over time, critically examining those opposing viewpoints, and connecting ideas to another field or discipline. So if they have a problem that they're facing in science, how might an educator solve it, or a mathematician, or how might an artist solve it? That would be quite interesting. And then once they're done and you've created this or helped them to generate this, you can put labels on these if you want to keep them more consistent, or you can change them out with a whiteboard marker each time, and then have them just throw that dice and where it lands is what they decide that they're going to do. You can decide to give them one dice, perhaps the depth dice, or perhaps the complexity dice, and just make it fun. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and I will talk to you next time.